The millionaire's 7-year-old paraplegic son accidentally falls into the mansion's swimming pool. Everyone was paralyzed, but what the maid did surprised everyone. If this story interested you, subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to like this video and tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the towering windows of the Martinez mansion, where 7-year-old Thomas sat in his wheelchair, watching the gardeners trim the pristine hedges below. His small fingers traced patterns on the glass, leaving temporary marks that would soon fade away, much like the fleeting moments of joy in this grand but hollow house. The mansion, with its impressive architecture and manicured gardens, stood as a testament to Richard Martinez's success in the business world. Yet within its walls, a different story unfolded, one of emotional distance and unspoken words. Thomas's wheelchair glided smoothly across the polished marble floors, the sound echoing through the empty corridors like a lonely reminder of his presence. Maria, the new housekeeper who had joined the household 3 months ago, watched the young boy from the doorway of the living room. Her heart ached at the sight of his solitary figure silhouetted against the large window. Unlike the other staff members who maintained a professional distance, Maria saw beyond Thomas's physical limitations to the bright, curious soul beneath. "Would you like to help me feed the birds today, Thomas?" she asked, her warm voice breaking through the afternoon stillness. The boy's face lit up with an enthusiasm that was rarely seen in the mansion's somber atmosphere. It was these small moments of connection that made Maria's decision to leave her small hometown worthwhile, despite the constant worry about her ailing mother back home. From his study on the upper floor, Richard Martinez observed the interaction between his son and the housekeeper. His fingers drummed against his mahogany desk, a habit that betrayed his inner turmoil. The sight of Thomas smiling, truly smiling, was something he hadn't witnessed in months. His wife Victoria's voice echoed in his mind, reminding him that maintaining proper boundaries with the staff was essential, but he couldn't deny the positive change in Thomas since Maria's arrival. Victoria Martinez swept through the mansion like a perfectly coordinated fashion show, her designer clothes and immaculate appearance masking a deeper fragility. She paused at the foot of the grand staircase, watching as Maria wheeled Thomas toward the garden doors. A flicker of emotion crossed her face. Was it jealousy, concern, or perhaps recognition of something she herself couldn't provide? "Mrs. Martinez," Maria acknowledged respectfully as they passed. Thomas waved at his mother, his excitement evident. "We're going to feed the birds, Mom. Maria says they remember people who are kind to them." Victoria's carefully composed smile wavered slightly. "Just don't stay out too long, darling. And Maria, please ensure he wears his jacket. The weather can be unpredictable." Her words carried the weight of unspoken authority, a reminder of the carefully maintained hierarchy within the household. As Maria helped Thomas into his jacket, her gentle efficiency and natural warmth stood in stark contrast to the formal atmosphere that pervaded the rest of the house. She had learned early in life that true strength often came wrapped in simple packages, and her experiences supporting her sick mother had taught her the value of genuine care. The garden welcomed them with a symphony of late afternoon sounds, birds calling, leaves rustling, and the distant hum of the city beyond the high walls. Maria spread a blanket on the grass near the pool, helping Thomas from his wheelchair onto its soft surface. The pool's water reflected the clouding sky above, its surface occasionally disturbed by a gentle breeze. From his study window, Richard found his attention drawn away from important contracts and business meetings. He watched as Maria taught Thomas how to hold his hand flat, scattered with birdseed. Waiting patiently for the cautious sparrows to approach, the scene stirred something in him, a longing for connection perhaps, or recognition of what his wealth and power couldn't buy. Victoria's voice cut through his reverie as she entered his study. "Richard, the Hendersons have invited us to their charity gala next weekend. I've already confirmed our attendance." She paused, noting his distraction. "What are you looking at?" Richard turned slowly from the window, his expression unreadable. "Our son," he replied simply. "When was the last time we heard him laugh? Like that?" Victoria's perfectly manicured nails tapped against her phone screen, a nervous habit she'd developed over years of maintaining appearances. "He needs structure, Richard. We can't have him getting too attached to the help. It's not appropriate." But Richard's attention had already drifted back to the scene below, where Thomas was beaming with joy as a brave sparrow pecked seeds from his outstretched hand. Maria's genuine laughter mingled with his son's, carrying up to the study window on the afternoon breeze. In that moment, something shifted imperceptibly in the carefully ordered world of the Martinez mansion, a tiny crack in the facade that would soon grow into something none of them could have predicted. The following days brought subtle changes to the mansion's routine. Maria's presence seemed to soften the sharp edges of formality, introducing warmth into spaces that had long forgotten such comfort. Thomas began looking forward to their daily activities, reading stories in the garden, creating art projects, or simply talking about the shapes they saw in the passing clouds. Victoria watched these changes with growing unease, her perfectly maintained exterior occasionally slipping to reveal glimpses of vulnerability. During her weekly lunch with her closest friend, Eleanor Henderson, she found herself struggling to maintain her usual composure. "I don't know what to make of it, Eleanor," Victoria confessed, stirring her untouched salad. "The new housekeeper, she's different from the others. Thomas adores her, and even Richard." She trailed off, leaving the thought unfinished. Eleanor reached across the table, patting Victoria's hand sympathetically. "Darling, you're overthinking this. She's staff, nothing more. Focus on the upcoming charity gala. Everyone who matters will be there." But Victoria couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was shifting in her carefully constructed world. That evening, she spent extra time in Thomas's room, attempting to engage him in conversation about his day. Her son's responses were polite but brief, his enthusiasm reserved for stories about his activities with Maria. Meanwhile, Richard found himself lingering in the garden more often, his laptop abandoned in his study as he observed the natural interaction between Maria and Thomas. One particular afternoon, he witnessed them engaged in an art project, papers spread across the garden table near the pool. "What are you creating?" he asked, surprising himself by joining them. Maria started to rise respectfully, but he waved, her back down. "We're drawing our dream garden, Dad," Thomas explained excitedly. "Maria showed me how to use watercolors to make the flowers look real." Richard studied the painting before him. Bright, hopeful colors splashed across the paper, in a way that spoke of joy rather than precision. It was so different from the structured, traditional artwork that adorned the mansion's walls. "It's beautiful," he said softly, noticing how Maria's hands, though worn from work, moved with gentle grace as she guided Thomas's brushstrokes. She looked up, meeting his gaze for a moment, and Richard felt an unexpected connection, a shared understanding of what Thomas needed. The weather had begun to turn, with clouds gathering more frequently over the mansion's grounds. That afternoon, a fine mist hung in the air, creating an ethereal atmosphere around the pool area. Victoria had just returned from her salon appointment, her hair and makeup immaculate despite the humidity. "Thomas should come inside," she called from the French doors. "The weather's turning, and you know how easily he catches cold." But Thomas was engrossed in his painting, adding final touches to his colorful creation. Maria began gathering their supplies, conscious of the increasing moisture in the air. The beachside pool surface rippled with tiny raindrops, creating concentric circles that spread outward like whispered secrets. Richard watched from his usual position in the study, his attention divided between an important email and the scene below. He noticed how Maria moved with careful efficiency, protecting Thomas's artwork from the rain while ensuring his safety remained her primary concern. Victoria's heels clicked against the marble as she approached the garden doors, her reflection fragmenting across the rain-speckled glass. She paused, watching Maria wheel Thomas toward the house, their shared laughter carrying through the mist. Something in their easy companionship made her hands tremble slightly as she reached for her phone, sending a quick message to Eleanor. "We need to talk." The rain began to fall more steadily now, creating a slick sheen across the pool deck. Maria's movements became more cautious as she navigated Thomas's wheelchair toward the house. None of them could have known that this ordinary afternoon was about to become the catalyst for events that would shatter their carefully maintained facade and force them all to confront truths they'd long buried beneath layers of propriety and pretense. The rain intensified as the afternoon wore on, drumming against the mansion's windows with increasing urgency. Inside, Maria had settled Thomas in the library, a cozy refuge from the growing storm. The warmth of the room contrasted sharply with the grey world outside, creating an intimate atmosphere that made the vast mansion feel almost homely. "Tell me about your mother again," Thomas asked, his eyes bright with curiosity, as Maria arranged his art supplies on the table beside him. She smiled, her hands pausing in their work. These quiet moments of sharing had become precious to them both. "She's the strongest person I know," Maria replied, her voice soft with affection. "Even now, when she's not feeling well, she never complains. She taught me that true strength isn't about power or money. It's about how much love you're willing to give." From the doorway, Richard observed this exchange unnoticed. He'd been on his way to his study, but found himself drawn to their conversation. There was something in Maria's words that resonated deeply within him, challenging the principles that had guided his life for so long. Victoria's voice suddenly cut through the moment, sharp as crystal. "Thomas, darling, it's time for your physical therapy." She stood in the hallway, perfectly composed in an expensive silk blouse, but her fingers worried at her pearl necklace, a telltale sign of her discomfort. "Can Maria come with us?" Thomas asked, his enthusiasm dimming slightly. Victoria's lips tightened almost imperceptibly. "This is professional medical care, sweetheart. Maria has other duties to attend to." Her tone was final, brooking no argument. As she wheeled Thomas away, Maria began tidying the art supplies, her movements measured and careful. Richard stepped into the library then, making his presence known. "You're good with him," he said simply. Maria turned, startled by his unexpected appearance. "He makes it easy, Mr. Martinez. Thomas has such a beautiful soul, he just needs people to see it." Her honesty was refreshing, devoid of the usual careful diplomacy that surrounded him. "And you do? See it?" Richard found himself asking, moving closer to examine Thomas's latest artwork spread across the table. "Every day," Maria replied softly. "In the way he notices things others miss, how he cares about the birds in the garden, how he worries about his mother when she seems sad." She paused, then added, "He's very much like you in that way, observing everything, feeling deeply." Richard looked up sharply, surprised by her insight. For a moment their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition perhaps of shared understanding. The library suddenly felt smaller, more intimate. The moment was broken by Eleanor Henderson's arrival, her voice carrying from the foyer. Victoria's friend had become an increasingly frequent visitor to the mansion, her presence a reminder of the social world that defined their lives. "Richard, I didn't expect to find you here," Eleanor exclaimed, appearing in the doorway. Her gaze flicked between Richard and Maria, a calculating look crossing her face. "Victoria mentioned you've been so busy with the merger." "Just checking on Thomas's progress," Richard replied smoothly, stepping back. "Maria has been helping him with his art therapy." Eleanor's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "How wonderful. Victoria's been telling me all about the changes in the household." She emphasized the word slightly, her meaning clear. Maria quietly excused herself, gathering the last of the art supplies. As she left the library, she could hear Eleanor's voice drop to a conspiratorial whisper. "Victoria's worried, Richard. The staff are talking." Later that afternoon, Maria found herself in the kitchen, preparing Thomas's favorite herbal tea. Through the window, she could see dark clouds gathering, making the pool area look ominous in the fading light. Her phone buzzed with a message from her sister about their mother's condition. The medical bills were mounting, and the treatments weren't showing the improvement they'd hoped for. Victoria appeared in the kitchen doorway, her presence unexpected in this domain she usually avoided. "Maria, I'd like to speak with you about maintaining appropriate boundaries in this household." Her voice was controlled, but there was an edge to it that hadn't been there before. "Of course, Mrs. Martinez," Maria replied calmly, though her heart began to race. She had known this conversation was coming, had seen it in the way Victoria watched her interactions with Thomas and Richard. My son has become overly attached. While your dedication is admirable, we must remember our respective positions. Thomas needs to develop relationships with children of his own social standing. Do you understand? Before Maria could respond, they heard Thomas's voice calling from the direction of the pool area. Both women turned toward the sound. Victoria's face paling as she realized her son had somehow made his way outside despite the threatening weather. The rain was falling steadily now, making the marble pool deck treacherously slick. Through the kitchen window, they could see Thomas's wheelchair near the pool's edge, where he had gone to rescue a baby bird that had fallen from its nest in the storm. Time seemed to slow down as the events unfolded by the pool. Victoria stood frozen in the doorway, her perfect composure shattering as she watched Thomas's wheelchair wobble dangerously close to the pool's edge. From his study window, Richard witnessed the scene with growing horror, his hands pressed against the glass as if he could reach through it to his son. The wheelchair's wheels slipped on the wet marble, and Thomas's small form pitched forward. Victoria's scream pierced the air, but her feet remained rooted to the spot, her designer heels clicking against each other as she trembled. The perfect image she had maintained for so many years crumbled in the face of real danger. Maria didn't hesitate. She burst through the French doors, her feet flying across the slick surface with sure-footed determination. Years of caring for her mother had taught her that love meant action, not hesitation. As Thomas's wheelchair tipped into the pool, Maria dove in after him. The cold water shocked her system, but her focus remained absolute. She could see Thomas struggling beneath the surface, his small body weighed down by the wheelchair. Swimming powerfully, she reached him in seconds, her hands finding purchase on his shirt as she pulled him free from the chair's restraints. Richard had rushed down from his study, taking the stairs two at a time, his heart pounding with a fear he had never known before. He reached the pool area just as Maria surfaced with Thomas in her arms, both of them gasping for air. "Help me get him out," Maria called, her voice strong despite the circumstances. Richard rushed forward, reaching for his son as Maria guided Thomas's body toward the pool's edge. Together they lifted him onto the deck, where Maria immediately began checking his vital signs. "He's breathing," she announced, relief evident in her voice. "Thomas, can you hear me? Squeeze my hand if you can hear me." A moment later, Thomas's fingers tightened around hers and his eyes fluttered open. Victoria finally moved, stumbling forward on unsteady legs. "Thomas? Oh God, Thomas!" Her carefully applied makeup ran in dark streaks down her face. Years of practiced perfection washing away in the rain. "I'm okay, Mum," Thomas managed to say, his voice weak but clear. "Maria saved me. Like she said her mother taught her, love means being brave." Richard knelt beside them, shrugging off his expensive suit jacket to wrap around Thomas's shivering form. His hands trembled as he helped Maria sit Thomas up, and, for the first time in years, he felt the full weight of his emotional distance from his son. Eleanor appeared at the French doors, her face a mask of shocked concern. "Victoria, should I call an ambulance?" But Victoria didn't respond, her eyes fixed on Maria, who was still holding Thomas protectively, her soaked uniform clinging to her frame. "No need for an ambulance," Maria said firmly, her medical training from caring for her mother taking over. "But he needs to get warm and dry immediately. Mr. Martinez, can you carry him to his room? I'll get some towels and warm clothes." Richard lifted Thomas into his arms, marveling at how small and precious his son felt against his chest. As they moved toward the house, he caught Maria's eye, and in that moment something profound passed between them, a shared understanding of what it meant to truly care for someone. Victoria followed them inside, her movements mechanical, her world tilted on its axis. Everything she had built her life around, appearances, social standing, perfect control, had just been exposed as meaningless in the face of real crisis. She watched as Maria efficiently organized the household staff, directing them with quiet authority to bring warm blankets and prepare hot tea. In Thomas's room, Maria helped Richard get his son changed into dry clothes, their movements synchronized as if they'd been working together for years. Thomas's color was returning to normal, and he even managed a small smile as Maria wrapped him in warm blankets. "You were so brave," Richard said softly, surprising himself with the emotion in his voice. He wasn't sure if he was speaking to his son or to Maria, who was wringing water from her hair into a towel. "Like the birds," Thomas replied sleepily. "Sometimes they fall, but they always find their way back up." Eleanor stood in the doorway, observing the scene with calculating eyes. She pulled Victoria aside, whispering urgently, "This changes things, Victoria. The staff will talk. Richard's behavior. You need to take control of this situation." But Victoria wasn't listening. She was watching Maria tend to her son with the natural care and affection that she herself had never been able to show. The carefully constructed walls of her world were crumbling, and in their place, uncomfortable truths were beginning to emerge. Richard remained by Thomas's bedside long after he had fallen asleep, his usual evening business calls forgotten. Maria had finally gone to change out of her wet clothes, but her presence lingered in the room, in the perfectly arranged blankets, in the gentle way she had comforted Thomas, in the quiet strength she had shown when it mattered most. Through the window, the storm continued to rage, but inside the Martinez mansion, an even more powerful storm was brewing, one that would challenge everything they thought they knew about love, loyalty, and the true meaning of family. The days following the incident brought subtle but profound changes to the Martinez mansion. Morning light filtered through the library windows, finding Richard at his desk, but his attention wasn't on the stack of contracts before him. Instead, he watched Thomas and Maria in the garden below, their daily bird-feeding ritual now carrying deeper meaning. "You're different with him now," Eleanor observed, her unexpected presence startling Richard from his contemplation. She had arrived early, ostensibly to discuss the upcoming charity gala with Victoria. "Nearly losing your child changes your perspective," Richard replied, his voice carrying an edge that warned against further commentary. But Eleanor Henderson hadn't maintained her position in their social circle by being easily deterred. "Victoria's worried, Richard. She barely slept last night. This situation with the housekeeper—" "Her name is Maria," Richard interrupted, surprising them both with his sharp tone. "And she saved my son's life while we all stood watching." Eleanor's perfectly penciled eyebrows rose slightly. "That's exactly what concerns Victoria. The staff are talking. The dynamics have shifted. Surely you understand how this could appear." Before Richard could respond, Victoria entered the study immaculately dressed as always, though careful observers might notice the slight tremor in her hands as she adjusted her jewelry. "Eleanor, darling, I thought we were meeting in the sitting room." Victoria's voice carried its usual polished tone, but there was an underlying tension that hadn't been there before. "I was just discussing the gala with Richard," Eleanor smoothly deflected. "The Hendersons' event will be the perfect opportunity to show everyone that everything is normal." Victoria's laugh held a brittle edge. "Normal? My son almost... and I couldn't..." She stopped, composing herself with visible effort. "Richard, we need to discuss Thomas's care arrangements." "What's there to discuss?" Richard turned from the window, fully facing his wife. "Maria has proven herself more than capable." "That's precisely the issue," Victoria pressed. "Thomas has become too attached. We need to maintain appropriate boundaries. I've been looking into exclusive care facilities." "No." Richard's response was immediate and firm. "Our son stays here." The tension in the room grew thick enough to cut with a knife. Eleanor glanced between the couple, sensing the shift in power dynamics that had occurred since the incident. Meanwhile, in the garden, Maria was helping Thomas create a new bird, Feeder, their easy companionship a stark contrast to the strained atmosphere inside. Thomas's face lit up as a familiar sparrow landed nearby, his joy unmarred by the adult complications brewing around him. "Maria," he asked, handling the birdseed with careful concentration, "why did Mom just stand there when I fell in the pool?" Maria's hands stilled for a moment. She chose her words carefully, mindful of her position yet unwilling to be anything but honest with the child who trusted her. Sometimes people freeze when they're scared. It doesn't mean they don't love you. But you didn't freeze, Thomas observed, his young mind cutting straight to the heart of the matter. You jumped right in. That's because I've learned that love means taking action, Maria explained gently. When my mother got sick, I couldn't afford to freeze. I had to learn to be brave. From his study window, Richard could see their heads bent together in conversation, the trust between them evident even from a distance. He remembered the weight of his son in his arms after the rescue, the way Maria had taken charge with quiet authority, and how Victoria had remained rooted to the spot, her perfect world crumbling around her. I've invited the Hendersons for dinner this evening, Victoria announced, pulling Richard from his thoughts. We need to present a united front before the gala. People are already talking about what happened. Let them talk, Richard replied, his voice carrying a new certainty that made Victoria step back slightly. Our son almost left us, Victoria. Does anything else really matter? Everything matters. Victoria's composure cracked slightly. Our position, our reputation, these things don't just affect us, they affect Thomas's future. Thomas's future. Richard turned to face her fully. Our son's future was saved by the very person you're trying to dismiss. While we stood watching, she acted. What does that say about our positions, our reputations? Eleanor cleared her throat delicately. Perhaps I should leave you two to discuss this privately. Victoria, shall we postpone our gala planning? But Victoria had moved to the window, watching Maria help Thomas back into his wheelchair, their movements synchronized by trust and practice. Look at them, she whispered, more to herself than the others. She gives him something I never could. Victoria, Eleanor started, but Victoria raised a hand to stop her. No, Eleanor. For once, let me speak without worrying about how it sounds. She turned to face Richard, her carefully maintained facade showing cracks. I've spent years trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, living up to everyone's expectations. And in the moment when it mattered most, I failed. I failed our son. The Henderson dinner party that evening became a stage for unspoken tensions and shifting allegiances. The formal dining room, with its crystal chandelier and antique furniture, seemed to hold its breath as the carefully orchestrated social performance began to unravel. Maria moved efficiently between the kitchen and dining room, serving dishes with quiet grace. She had changed into a fresh uniform, but there was a new confidence in her bearing that hadn't been there before. Each time she entered the room, Richard found his attention drawn to her presence, noticing how she always checked on Thomas first, ensuring his comfort with subtle adjustments to his position or water glass. The salmon is excellent, James Henderson commented, attempting to maintain the illusion of normalcy. Victoria, you must share your chef's recipe. Victoria's smile remained fixed as she replied, Actually, Maria prepared tonight's meal. She's quite versatile in her abilities. The slight emphasis on the word didn't go unnoticed by anyone at the table. How unusual, Eleanor responded, her tone carefully neutral. Though perhaps it's time to consider hiring additional staff, someone more specialized for Thomas's needs. Before Victoria could respond, Thomas spoke up. Maria is teaching me to paint birds, he announced proudly. She says everyone has wings inside them, even if you can't see them. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. James Henderson cleared his throat, while his wife studied her wineglass with sudden interest. Richard, however, found himself smiling at his son's innocent wisdom. That's beautiful, Thomas, he said, causing Victoria's fork to clatter against her plate. Perhaps you could show the Hendersons your latest artwork after dinner? Oh, I don't think, Eleanor began, but Thomas was already excited by the idea. Maria helped me create a whole garden scene. The birds look almost real now. His enthusiasm was contagious, and for a moment, the artificial atmosphere cracked, allowing genuine warmth to seep through. Victoria watched this exchange with complex emotions playing across her face. The perfect dinner party she had planned as a show of normalcy was instead highlighting everything that had changed. When Maria entered again to clear the plates, Victoria noticed how naturally Thomas reached for her hand, how confidently she supported him, and how Richard's eyes followed their interaction. "If you'll excuse me," Victoria said suddenly, standing up. "I need a moment." She left the dining room with measured steps, but once in the hallway her composure crumbled. She found herself in the library, surrounded by the artwork Thomas had created with Maria's help. Maria found her there a few minutes later, coming to check if she was all right. "Mrs. Martinez, can I get you anything?" Victoria turned, tears streaming down her face, no longer caring about maintaining appearances. "How do you do it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How do you love so freely without fear?" Maria hesitated, then stepped fully into the room. "Love isn't about being perfect, Mrs. Martinez. It's about being present. My mother taught me that when she got sick. All the money in the world couldn't help her, but holding her hand, being there, that made all the difference." "I couldn't move," Victoria confessed, the words tumbling out. "When Thomas was in danger, I couldn't move." "What kind of mother does that make me?" "A human one," Maria replied gently. "Fear can paralyze anyone. The question is, what do you do after?" Their conversation was interrupted by Richard's arrival. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene before him, his perfectly poised wife with tears streaming down her face, and the housekeeper who had saved their son standing nearby with compassion in her eyes. "The Hendersons are leaving," he announced quietly. "Thomas is showing them his art collection first." Victoria quickly tried to compose herself, but Richard raised a hand to stop her. "Don't," he said softly. "For once, let's be real with each other." "Real?" Victoria laughed bitterly. "What's real anymore, Richard? Our perfect life, our perfect marriage, the way you look at her." She gestured toward Maria, who had begun to step away discreetly. "Please stay, Maria," Richard said, his voice carrying an authority that had nothing to do with his position as her employer. "I think it's time we all talked honestly." The library, with its walls of books and Thomas's artwork, became a confessional space. Victoria sank into one of the leather armchairs, her usual perfect posture abandoned. "I've spent so many years trying to be what everyone expected," she said quietly. "The perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect socialite. And in the moment when none of that mattered, when my son needed me most, I failed." "We all failed," Richard corrected gently. "All except Maria." He turned to the woman who had changed their lives in ways none of them had expected. "You showed us what real strength looks like, what real love looks like." The morning after the Henderson dinner dawned with an unusual quietness in the Martinez mansion. Victoria had retreated to her private suite, while Richard found himself wandering the gardens before sunrise, his mind replaying the events of the previous evening. The carefully maintained facades of their lives had begun to crack, revealing truths they could no longer ignore. Maria arrived early, as always, but the atmosphere had shifted. The usual boundaries between employer and employee had blurred. Transformed by shared emotions and unspoken understanding, she found Thomas already awake in his room, eagerly working on a new painting. "You're up early?" she said softly, helping him adjust his easel. The morning light streaming through his window created a perfect backdrop for his art. "I couldn't sleep," Thomas admitted, his brush moving with growing confidence across the paper. "I heard Mom crying last night, after the Hendersons left." Maria's hands stilled for a moment. "Sometimes adults cry when they're trying to be brave," she explained carefully. "Like when the birds learn to fly, it can be scary to face new truths." "Is that why Dad spent the night in his study?" Thomas asked, his perception sharp as ever. "Eleanor told Mom that everything was falling apart, but maybe it's just changing, like you said about the seasons." Before Maria could respond, Richard appeared in the doorway. He had clearly been up all night, his usual impeccable appearance slightly disheveled. "Thomas, you're becoming quite the philosopher," he said, managing a smile for his son. "Maria teaches me that everything in nature has a purpose," Thomas replied, adding careful strokes to his painting, "even the storms." Richard's eyes met Maria's over Thomas's head, and something electric passed between them, an understanding, a connection that went beyond words. "Would you join me for coffee in the garden, Maria?" he asked, his voice carrying a weight of unspoken meaning. I think we need to discuss some changes. In the garden, the morning air was crisp and clean after the previous night's emotional storms. Richard led Maria to a small table near the rose bushes, far enough from the house to ensure privacy. A staff member brought coffee and quietly retreated, leaving them alone. Victoria has decided to spend some time at her sister's house in Vermont, Richard began, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. She says she needs space to think, to figure out who she is beyond the role she's been playing. Maria listened carefully, her face showing compassion without judgment. Sometimes we need distance to see things clearly, she offered. Clarity, Richard echoed, looking out over the garden where Thomas had nearly been lost. I've been thinking about that word all night. For years I thought I knew what my life was supposed to be. Success, power, maintaining appearances. But when I saw you dive into that pool without hesitation, I only did what anyone would do, Maria interjected, but Richard shook his head. No, that's just it. Nobody else did. We all stood frozen, trapped by our own expectations and fears. You showed us what real courage looks like. He paused, gathering his thoughts. My lawyers called this morning. Victoria's sister had already contacted them about separation papers. Maria's breath caught. Mr. Martinez. Richard, he corrected, gently. I think we're past formalities now. Richard, she said, the name feeling foreign on her tongue. I don't want to be the reason your family breaks apart. You're not, he assured her, reaching across the table to touch her hand. You're the reason we're finally facing the truth. Victoria and I, we've been living separate lives for years, connected only by social obligations and our love for Thomas. The incident at the pool just made it impossible to pretend anymore. Inside the house, Eleanor Henderson arrived unannounced, her face tight with concern. Finding Victoria's suite empty, she made her way to Thomas's room where she found him still painting. Where is everyone? She demanded more sharply than she intended. Thomas looked up from his artwork, his expression remarkably calm. Mom's packing for Vermont, he said simply. Dad's in the garden with Maria. They're talking about changes. Eleanor moved to the window, her carefully maintained composure slipping as she saw Richard and Maria in what appeared to be an intimate conversation. This is unacceptable, she muttered, pulling out her phone. Victoria needs to come back immediately. Why? Thomas asked, adding another bird to his painting. Mom smiled when she told me about Vermont this morning. She said sometimes you have to fly away to find your way home. Eleanor stared at the boy, seeing him perhaps for the first time not as a symbol of social status, but as a child who understood more than adults realized. But what about your father and her? She couldn't bring herself to say Maria's name. Dad laughs now, Thomas said simply, and Maria teaches me about love and courage. Isn't that what families are supposed to do? In the garden, Richard and Maria's conversation had reached a crucial point. I want you to take a more official role in Thomas's care, Richard said. Not as a housekeeper, but as his full-time caregiver and teacher. The salary would reflect the change in position, of course. Maria's eyes widened. The other staff, the social implication. Let them talk, Richard said firmly. I've spent too many years worrying about what others think. When I saw you save my son, I realized something. Real strength isn't found in power or position. It's found in the courage to be true to yourself. The news of Victoria's departure and Maria's promotion spread through the mansion's staff. Like wildfire, Eleanor Henderson had made sure of that, her carefully worded phone calls setting the social circuit ablaze with speculation and judgment. But within the mansion's walls, a different kind of transformation was taking place. Victoria's suite, usually immaculate and coldly perfect, now showed signs of disruption. Half-empty drawers and open closets testified to her hasty packing. She moved through the space like a ghost, selecting items for her stay in Vermont, each choice weighted with meaning. You don't have to go, Eleanor insisted, watching her friend pack from the doorway. Think about the scandal, the social implications. The charity gala is in 2 weeks. Victoria paused, holding a framed photo of Thomas as a baby. Do you know what I thought about, Eleanor, when I saw my son falling into that pool? Not about him, not about saving him, but about whether my designer dress would be ruined if I jumped in. Her voice cracked. What kind of mother thinks about that? You're being too hard on yourself. Eleanor tried to comfort her, but Victoria shook her head. No, I'm finally being honest. Maria didn't think about her clothes, her position, or what anyone would say. She just acted, out of pure love. She placed the photo carefully in her suitcase. I need to learn how to do that. Meanwhile, in the garden, Thomas was having his first official lesson with Maria in her new role. Richard had arranged a proper outdoor classroom space with an adjustable table for Thomas's wheelchair and an easel for their art projects. The morning sun cast warm shadows across their workspace as Maria helped Thomas with both his studies and his painting. Can you tell me about the different types of birds we see in our garden? Maria asked, combining science with their art lesson. Thomas's face lit up with enthusiasm. The sparrows are the bravest, he began, his brush moving confidently across the paper. They're small, but they're not afraid to come close. Like you, Maria. Richard, watching from his new garden office setup, couldn't help but smile at his son's insight. He had moved his workspace outside, claiming he needed fresh air, but everyone knew he wanted to be closer to Thomas and Maria's lessons. The sound of car tires on gravel announced Victoria's departure. Thomas's painting session paused as they watched her sleek luxury car pull away from the mansion. There were no dramatic goodbyes. Those had happened earlier in private, where Victoria had held her son close and promised to come back stronger. Will Mom find her wings in Vermont? Thomas asked Maria, his young voice carrying the wisdom that children sometimes possess. I think that's exactly what she's going to do, Maria answered, helping him clean his brushes. Sometimes people need to step away to find their way back to themselves. Eleanor's voice cut through the peaceful scene. This is all very touching, she said, her tone sharp with disapproval. But Richard, surely you understand how this looks. The social implications alone. Eleanor, Richard interrupted, standing up from his garden desk. I appreciate your concern, but my priority is my son's happiness and well-being. For the first time in years, I'm seeing him truly thrive. But the timing. Victoria barely gone and already... Already what, Eleanor? Maria spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. Already Thomas is engaged in his studies? Already he's expressing himself through art? Already he's learning that love doesn't have to be perfect to be real? Eleanor stepped back, startled by this direct challenge from someone she considered staff. But before she could respond, Thomas added his own perspective. Miss Eleanor, Maria teaches me that every bird has its own song. Mum's finding hers in Vermont. Maybe you could find yours too instead of worrying about everyone else's. The innocence and wisdom in his words left Eleanor speechless. She looked around at the scene before her. Thomas, happy and engaged in his artwork. Maria standing protective and confident beside him. Richard watching them both with undisguised admiration. And for the first time, she saw beyond the social implications to the authentic human emotions at play. The gala, she said weakly, making one last attempt. What will we tell everyone? The truth, Richard replied simply. That our family is learning to fly in new ways. That sometimes courage means letting go of what others expect and embracing what feels right in your heart. As Eleanor's car disappeared down the driveway, Maria turned to find Richard watching her with an intensity that made her heart skip. You've changed everything, he said softly. No, Maria corrected him, helping Thomas add the finishing touches to his painting. Life changed everything. I just showed you how to embrace it. The approach of the Henderson Charity Gala cast a long shadow over the Martinez mansion. 2 weeks had passed since Victoria's departure, and the social circles buzzed with speculation and judgment. Yet within the mansion's walls, a different kind of transformation continued to unfold. Richard stood in his closet, adjusting his bow tie for the evening ahead. Through the window, he could hear Thomas's laughter floating up from the garden, where Maria was helping him prepare for his first public speaking engagement at the gala, a presentation about his art therapy program for other children with disabilities. Remember, Maria's voice carried clearly in the evening air, just speak from your heart like you do when you tell me about the birds. Richard smiled, remembering how she had convinced him to let Thomas participate. "He needs to know his voice matters," she had said, "that his story can help others." Her wisdom continued to surprise and move him. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Andrews, his longtime butler, entered with an envelope. "Sir, Mrs. Martinez's lawyers have sent the final separation papers for your review." Richard took the envelope, feeling its weight, both physical and symbolic. "Thank you, Andrews. How are things downstairs? I know these changes haven't been easy on the staff." Andrews straightened, his professional demeanor softening slightly. "Change is never easy, sir, but if I may speak freely, the house feels more alive now. Young Master Thomas's laughter fills these halls in a way it never did before." Before Richard could respond, Eleanor Henderson's voice echoed from the foyer. "Below." "Richard, we need to talk before the gala." Richard found her pacing in the library, impeccably dressed for the evening ahead. "The guest list is complete," she announced without preamble. "Everyone who matters will be there. We need to discuss how you're going to handle this situation." "There's nothing to handle, Eleanor," Richard replied calmly. "My son is giving a presentation about his art therapy program. Maria will be there to support him as his teacher and caregiver." "That's exactly what I'm talking about," Eleanor's key. Composure cracked slightly. "You can't bring her to the gala. It's one thing to have her working here, but to present her in society? The rumors are already overwhelming." "What rumors, Miss Eleanor?" Thomas's voice came from the doorway, where he sat in his wheelchair with Maria standing quietly behind him. He was dressed in a small tuxedo, his art portfolio carefully arranged in his lap. Eleanor had the grace to look embarrassed. "Thomas, darling, I didn't see you there. You look very handsome." "Thank you," he replied with simple dignity. "Maria helped me choose the bow tie. She says it matches my courage." He turned to his father. "Dad, can we practice my speech one more time?" Richard moved to his son's side, sharing a brief glance with Maria that spoke volumes. "Of course, Eleanor, if you'll excuse us." But Eleanor wasn't finished. "Richard, think about what you're doing. Victoria's been gone barely 2 weeks and you're already..." "Already what?" Richard's voice took on a steel edge. "Already putting my son's needs first. Already recognizing the value of someone who showed more courage and love in one moment than we managed in years." Maria stepped forward, her simple evening dress elegant in its understatement. "Perhaps I should stay home tonight. I don't want to create additional tension." "No," Thomas protested, reaching for her hand. "You have to come. My birds won't fly without you there." Richard watched this interaction, seeing the pure trust between his son and the woman who had changed their lives. "Maria's coming," he said firmly. "Not as staff, but as our guest. Anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to leave." Eleanor stared at them, the powerful businessman, the former housekeeper, and the young boy in the wheelchair, seeing, for the first time, something she hadn't expected. A family, unconventional perhaps, but more real than the perfectly posed photographs that lined the mansion's walls. "The social committee won't approve," she tried one last time. Thomas looked up from his portfolio. "Miss Eleanor, Maria teaches me that approval from others isn't as important as being true to yourself. Maybe you could include that in your opening speech." The innocence and wisdom in his words left Eleanor speechless. She looked around the library, taking in the artwork that covered the walls. Thomas's birds in flight, each one representing a small victory, a moment of courage, a step toward freedom. "I'll see you all at the gala," she finally said, turning to leave. At the door, she paused. "Thomas, your bow tie does match your courage. It's very becoming." After she left, Maria helped Thomas arrange his portfolio one final time. Richard watched them work together, their movements synchronized by trust and understanding. The separation papers in his pocket seemed to weigh less now, replaced by the lightness of possibility. "Are you ready for tonight?" he asked his son. Thomas smiled, looking between his father and Maria. "Yes, I'm going to tell them about how love gives you wings, even when you can't walk, and how sometimes the bravest thing isn't jumping into pools, but letting your heart show the way." Maria's eyes met Richard's over Thomas's head, and in that moment, they both knew that whatever challenges the gala might bring, they would face them together. not as employer and employee, but as two people united by love for a remarkable child who had taught them all how to fly. The Henderson estate glittered with hundreds of lights as the city's elite gathered for the annual charity gala. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway, depositing guests in designer evening wear, who paused to pose for society photographers. Among them, the Martinez family's arrival created a subtle but noticeable stir. Richard stepped out first, his commanding presence drawing immediate attention. But it was his next action that set the whispers in motion, helping Maria emerge from the car with a gentleness that spoke of something far beyond professional courtesy. Together, they lifted Thomas's wheelchair with practiced ease, their coordinated movements telling a story of shared days and unspoken understanding. "Remember what we practiced," Maria encouraged softly as they approached the entrance. Thomas sat straight in his chair, his art portfolio protected carefully in his lap, his bow tie a splash of confident color against his small tuxedo. The grand ballroom fell into a hushed silence as they entered. Eleanor Henderson, hosting from her usual position near the entrance, felt her carefully orchestrated evening beginning to shift off its axis. The presence of Maria, no longer in uniform but in an elegant evening gown, beside Richard Martinez, sent ripples through the IG crowd. "Richard," James Henderson approached, champagne in hand. "We didn't expect, that is, we heard Victoria was in Vermont, but..." "Yes, she's finding her wings," Thomas spoke up proudly, "just like in my paintings. Would you like to see them, Mr. Henderson? I'm presenting them later." James blinked, thrown off script by the child's directness. "Of course, young man. I hear you've quite a talent." As Thomas began explaining his art therapy program with surprising poise, Maria stood quietly beside him, her presence both supportive and dignified. Richard watched them with undisguised pride, no longer concerned with the whispers and stares around them. "This is highly irregular," Eleanor muttered, appearing at Richard's elbow. "Victoria's only been gone 2 weeks, and you bring her here, like this." "Like what, Eleanor?" Richard's voice was calm but carried an edge. "Like a woman who saved my son's life, like someone who taught him to express himself through art, like a person who showed more genuine care for Thomas than our entire social circle combined." Before Eleanor could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. Victoria Martinez stood in the doorway, elegant as ever but somehow different. Her usual protective armor of designer perfection had been replaced by something softer, more authentic. The room held its breath, anticipating drama, but Victoria moved purposefully toward Thomas, kneeling beside his wheelchair. "I wouldn't miss your first presentation, sweetheart," she said softly. "Your Aunt Claire helped me understand some important things in Vermont." Thomas's face lit up. "Mom, wait until you see my new paintings. Maria helped me create a whole series about finding courage." Victoria's eyes met Maria's, and something unspoken passed between them. An understanding, a recognition of shared love for this remarkable child. "I'd love to see them," she said, her voice genuine. "Perhaps you could explain them to me?" Richard stepped forward, tension evident in his shoulders, but Victoria held up a hand. "It's all right, Richard. I'm not here to create a scene. I'm here for our son." She turned to Maria. "And to thank you, properly this time, for everything you've done for him, for all of us, really." The surrounding crowd tried to pretend they weren't hanging on every word, but the moment was too powerful to ignore. Here was Victoria Martinez, queen of their social circle, speaking to her husband's what? The whispers couldn't quite decide how to categorize Maria's role. "Ladies and gentlemen," Eleanor announced, trying to regain control of her event, "if you'd all take your seats, we're about to begin the evening's presentations." As the crowd moved toward their tables, Victoria touched Maria's arm. Would you sit with us? Thomas will want both of us there when he presents." Maria glanced at Richard, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "I'd be honored," she replied simply. Thomas beamed at his parents and Maria, his small face wise beyond his years. "See, just like I painted, when birds of different feathers fly together, they make the sky more beautiful." The evening progressed. with an energy unlike any previous gala. Thomas's presentation, delivered with childlike honesty and surprising insight, moved many to tears. He spoke about courage, about love that transcends boundaries, and about finding strength in unexpected places. His paintings, displayed on easels around the room, told a story of transformation. Birds taking flight, breaking free from golden cages, finding new paths through open skies. As applause filled the ballroom, Richard found himself standing between Victoria and Maria, both women focused on Thomas's proud smile. In that moment, he realized that love didn't always follow society's carefully drawn lines. Sometimes it created new patterns, like the flight paths in his son's paintings, unexpected, beautiful, and perfectly right in their own way. The morning. After the gala, sunlight streamed through the mansion's windows, illuminating a world forever changed by the previous night's events. Victoria sat in the garden with her sister Claire, who had accompanied her back from Vermont, watching Thomas and Maria in their morning art session. "He's flourishing," Claire observed, noting how Thomas's movements had become more confident, his smile more frequent. "Vermont helped you see what was really important, didn't it?" Victoria nodded, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. Gone were the nervous adjustments to her jewelry, the constant checking of her appearance. "I spent so many years trying to be perfect that I forgot how to be real." Watching him last night, speaking about his art, about courage, he's become more than we ever dreamed possible. In the garden classroom, Maria was helping Thomas set up a new canvas. His presentation at the gala had inspired him to start a new series of paintings, this one exploring the concept of family in all its forms. Richard joined them, carrying his morning coffee and a stack of papers. "The Art Therapy Foundation called," he announced, pulling up a chair. "They want to feature Thomas's work in their next exhibition. They're particularly interested in his Birds of Courage series." Thomas's face lit up. "Can we invite Mom to help with the exhibition? She understands about flying now. I could tell when she hugged me last night." Maria and Richard exchanged glances, both remembering the unexpected grace of the previous evening. Victoria's return hadn't brought the drama everyone expected, but rather a new kind of understanding. "I think that's a wonderful idea," Maria said softly, helping Thomas mix the perfect shade of blue for his sky. "Your mother has found her own kind of courage." From their spot under the rose arbor, Victoria and Claire continued their observation. "You're handling this better than anyone expected," Claire noted, gesturing toward Maria. The old Victoria was too afraid of losing control to see what was really important," Victoria interrupted. Watching Maria with Thomas, seeing how naturally they connect, how she gives him exactly what I couldn't. It hurt at first, but then I realized something. Love isn't a finite resource. It grows when you share it. Richard approached their table, coffee in hand. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying a careful politeness. "Thomas would like both of you to see his new painting concept." Victoria stood, smoothing her casual dress, so different from her former designer armor. "Both of us? You mean—" "Yes," Richard smiled. "You and Claire. He's doing a series about different kinds of families. He says every bird needs its own nest." As they joined Thomas and Maria at the art table, Eleanor Henderson's sleek car pulled into the driveway. She emerged looking flustered, clutching a stack of newspapers. "Have you seen the society pages?" she demanded, approaching the group. "We've been rather focused on Thomas's new project," Richard replied calmly. But Eleanor thrust the papers onto the table. "Martinez family redefines society's boundaries," she read from the headline. "Young Thomas Martinez steals hearts with moving presentation on courage and unconventional love." Thomas looked up from his painting, his brush poised mid-stroke. "Is that bad, Miss Eleanor? Maria says truth is always beautiful, even when it's different from what people expect." Eleanor deflated slightly, looking around at the scene before her. Victoria and Claire sitting comfortably with Richard and Maria, all focused on Thomas's artwork, all somehow fitting together in a way that defied conventional explanation. "The committee members are in an uproar," she continued, but with less conviction. They're saying the gala violated all social protocols, that allowing Thomas to present his art therapy program was unconventional. Unconventional, Victoria repeated thoughtfully. Like a bird learning to fly after spending years in a cage, or like a mother learning to love without fear of imperfection. Thomas added another stroke to his canvas, creating a nest unlike any the others had seen, wide and open, with room for multiple birds of different colors and sizes. "Look," he said proudly, "this is us, all of us." Maria leaned over to examine the painting, her professional demeanor softened by genuine admiration. "The nest is beautiful, Thomas. Tell us about the different birds." "Well, this golden one is Mom. She's learning to fly in new ways," Thomas explained, pointing to each figure in turn. "And this strong one is Dad, watching over everyone. This bright one is you, Maria, showing everyone how to be brave. And this one," he pointed to a smaller bird, "is me, learning that being different doesn't mean being alone." Eleanor sank into an empty chair, the newspapers forgotten in her lap. She watched as Victoria moved to stand behind Thomas's wheelchair, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder, not to control or direct, but simply to connect. Richard and Maria stood close together, their bodies unconsciously aligned, while Claire observed it all with quiet approval. "The society pages don't matter," Richard said finally, addressing Eleanor but looking at his unconventional family. "What matters is that my son is happy, healthy and surrounded by people who love him authentically. If that violates social protocols, then perhaps it's the protocols that need to change." The weeks following the gala brought unexpected changes to the Martinez mansion. The rigid formality that once defined its spaces continued to soften, transformed by Thomas's art and the new understanding between its inhabitants. Victoria had moved back in, but to the guest house in the garden, close enough to be present in Thomas's life, yet maintaining the space everyone needed to grow. One sunny afternoon, as Thomas worked on his exhibition pieces in the garden, an unexpected visitor arrived. Dr. Sarah Chen, director of the Children's Art Therapy Foundation, walked through the garden gates, her presence causing a flutter of activity. "Thomas's work is extraordinary," she said, examining the paintings spread across the outdoor workspace. "The way he uses birds to express complex emotional concepts, it's exactly what our program needs." Maria stood proudly beside Thomas's wheelchair, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "He's teaching us all how to see the world differently," she said softly. Victoria emerged from the guest house, joining the group with a natural ease that would have been impossible just months ago. "Thomas has always seen things uniquely," she offered, sharing a warm glance with Maria. "We just needed to learn how to look through his eyes." Dr. Chen moved from painting to painting, her professional assessment softening into genuine admiration. "The foundation would like to offer Thomas a special position," she announced. "We want him to lead workshops for other children, sharing his techniques and his story." Richard, who had been quietly observing from his garden office, stepped forward. "That's a wonderful opportunity, but..." He glanced at Maria, their shared concern evident. "But you're worried about Thomas's comfort and safety," Dr. Chen finished. "So of course we'd want Maria to continue as his primary support. Her background in art therapy and her obvious connection with Thomas would be invaluable to the program." Thomas looked up from his current painting, his face bright with excitement. "Could Mom help too? She's learning to paint now. Maria's teaching both of us." Victoria's eyes widened in surprise, touched by her son's inclusion. The art lessons had started as a way to rebuild their connection, spending quiet mornings in the garden studio while Maria guided them both through basic techniques. "The program is about more than just art," Dr. Chen explained, smiling at the family's dynamic. "It's about healing, about finding strength in unexpected places. From what I've seen, that's something all of you understand deeply." Eleanor Henderson, who had become a more frequent and less judgmental visitor, chose that moment to arrive. She paused at the garden entrance, taking in the scene. Thomas surrounded by his artwork, supported by both Maria and Victoria, while Richard watched over them all with quiet pride. "I just heard from the society board," she announced, her voice carrying a new note of respect. They want to feature Thomas's story in their annual charity publication, not just his art, but the whole journey, if you're willing to share it. Thomas looked around at his family, his father standing close to Maria, their bodies naturally oriented toward each other, his mother more relaxed and genuine than he'd ever known her, and Maria, who had taught them all about courage and unconditional love. "We could tell them about how love gives you wings," he suggested, adding another stroke to his painting. "About how sometimes families are like my birds. They don't all look the same, but they fly together anyway." Richard moved to stand behind Maria, his hand finding hers in a gesture that had become natural and unguarded. "What do you think?" he asked softly. "Are we ready to share our story?" Maria squeezed his hand, watching as Victoria joined Thomas at his easel, genuinely interested in his technique. "I think," she replied, "that truth has its own kind of beauty, and Thomas has shown us that the most beautiful nests are the ones with room for everyone." Dr. Chen watched this interaction with professional interest. "This is exactly what makes Thomas's perspective so valuable," she noted. "He sees love not as something that divides or constrains, but as a force that expands to include everyone, willing to be authentic." Eleanor, who had once been the guardian of social propriety, found herself nodding in agreement. "The old rules don't seem to matter much anymore," she admitted. "Not when you see how much happier everyone is now." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Thomas's artwork, highlighting the vibrant colors and bold strokes that told their family's story. Each painting showed birds in flight, some solo, some in pairs, some in unconventional formations, but all of them free and authentic. "You know what this means, don't you?" Thomas asked, adding final touches to his latest piece. "We're all learning to fly together now. Even Miss Eleanor is getting new wings." The laughter that followed was genuine and warm, filling the garden with the kind of joy that comes from being truly accepted. Victoria moved to stand beside Maria, their shared love for Thomas bridging any remaining distance between them. "He's right," Victoria said softly. "We're all learning to fly. Some of us just needed a brave little bird to show us how." The Children's Art Therapy Foundation's Central Gallery had been transformed for Thomas's first workshop. Easels formed a welcoming circle, each station adapted for different needs. Some lower for wheelchair access, others with special brush holders and supports. The morning light streamed through the high windows, creating an atmosphere of possibility. Thomas sat at the front of the room, Maria by his side as they waited for their first students to arrive. His latest series of paintings lined the walls, a visual journey of his own path to finding strength through art. "Are you nervous?" Maria asked softly, helping him arrange his materials. "A little," Thomas admitted, adjusting his bow tie, the same one he'd worn at the gala, now his lucky charm. "But you taught me that being nervous means you're about to do something brave." Richard watched from the doorway, his usual business attire replaced by casual clothes more suited to an art workshop. The transformation in his son still amazed him, the shy boy who once watched life from behind windows, now preparing to teach others. The first family arrived, a girl about Thomas's age in a wheelchair, her mother hovering uncertainly behind. "Her?" Thomas's face lit up with welcome. "Hi, I'm Thomas. Would you like to learn how to paint birds?" Victoria, who had insisted on being part of the workshop team, stepped forward to greet the mother. Gone was the society hostess's artificial warmth replaced by genuine understanding. "The first time is the hardest," she said softly, "but watch, they'll surprise us all." More families arrived, filling the space with nervous energy and cautious hope. Each child carried their own story, their own struggles, but Thomas's warm smile and enthusiastic welcome began to break down barriers. "Today we're going to learn about finding our wings," Thomas announced, his voice clear and confident. "Everyone has them, even if we can't see them yet. Right, Maria?" Maria nodded, moving to help distribute materials. "That's right. And sometimes our wings come in different forms, like your paintbrushes." As the workshop progressed, something magical began to happen. The children, inspired by Thomas's enthusiasm and Maria's gentle guidance, started to open up. Colors flew across canvases, hesitant at first, then with growing confidence. A young boy with trembling hands struggled with his brush. Thomas wheeled over to him, sharing the technique Maria had taught him. "See? You don't have to hold it perfectly. The shakiness can make the feathers look more real." Victoria found herself working with a mother who couldn't stop crying as she watched her daughter paint for the first time. "I never thought," the woman began. "I know," Victoria said, squeezing her hand. "I used to think perfection was everything, but look, sometimes the most beautiful things come from letting go." Richard moved through the room, helping where needed, but mostly watching the interaction between Thomas and Maria as they guided their students. Their natural synergy, the way they anticipated each other's needs and movements, spoke of something deeper than teacher and student. Dr. Chen arrived mid-session, pausing in the doorway to observe. "This is extraordinary," she whispered to Richard. "The Foundation Board will want to expand the program immediately." "It's all Thomas and Maria," Richard replied proudly. "They have a way of making everyone feel capable of flying." The morning light shifted to afternoon as the workshop continued. Parents who had arrived tense and worried now sat with their children, many picking up brushes themselves. The room filled with colorful birds of all shapes and sizes, some soaring, some perched, some still in their nests, but all expressing something uniquely personal. Eleanor Henderson slipped in quietly, carrying a camera. The Society publication had commissioned her to document Thomas's program, but what she captured went far beyond a simple Society piece. She photographed Thomas demonstrating brush techniques, his face alive with purpose. She caught Maria's gentle hands guiding nervous fingers, Victoria's understanding smiles as she spoke with parents, Richard's proud gaze as he watched his son teach. "This isn't just art therapy," Eleanor murmured, reviewing her photos. "This is healing for everyone in the room." As the workshop drew to a close, Thomas addressed his students one final time. "Remember," he said, wheeling to the front of the room, "every bird flies differently. Some use wings, some use paint, some use love. The important thing is finding your own way to soar." Parents gathered their children's artwork, many with tears in their eyes. The mother from earlier approached Victoria. "How did you learn to let go?" she asked quietly. Victoria glanced at Maria, who was helping Thomas clean his brushes. "I had help," she admitted. "Sometimes the bravest thing is accepting that someone else might know better than you what your child needs." After the last family left, Thomas sat surrounded by the day's paintings, his eyes bright with happiness. "Can we do this again tomorrow?" he asked. Maria laughed, ruffling his hair. "We have to let these families practice their flying first. But yes, there will be more workshops." Richard approached them, carrying Thomas's jacket. "How about we celebrate today's success? I think this calls for ice cream in the park." "Can Mum come too?" Thomas asked, looking at Victoria, who was gathering her own painting supplies. "I'd like that," Victoria said, sharing a warm smile with Maria. "Besides, I need some tips for my next painting lesson." As they prepared to leave, Eleanor showed them the photos on her camera. Each image captured moments of connection, of breakthrough, of joy. "This isn't just changing these children's lives," she observed. "It's changing how society sees ability, family, love." "That's because love is like art," Thomas declared, wise beyond his years. "There's no wrong way to do it as long as it comes from the heart." The afternoon sun painted long shadows across the gallery floor as they left together. Not the perfect society family they once pretended to be, but something far more valuable, a genuine family, built on understanding, acceptance, and the courage to love without boundaries. The success of Thomas's first workshop rippled through the community like waves in a pond. The Foundation's phone lines buzzed with inquiries from families hoping to participate in future sessions. But within the Martinez mansion, an even more profound transformation was taking place. One evening, as summer began to fade into autumn, the family gathered in the garden for dinner, a new tradition that had replaced the formal dining room meals of the past. Victoria had joined them from the guest house, bringing a painting she'd been working on in her private sessions with Maria. "It's not quite finished," she said hesitantly, propping the canvas on an easel. The painting showed a garden scene, less polished than Thomas's work, but filled with honest emotion. "I'm still learning to let go of perfection." "It's beautiful, Mom," Thomas said earnestly, wheeling closer to examine the details. "See how the flowers are all different, like us." Richard, setting plates on the outdoor table, paused to look at Victoria's work. The woman who had once measured her worth by social standing was now finding her voice through paint and canvas. Maria stood beside him, their shoulders touching lightly, a gesture that had become natural and unguarded. "The foundation board called today," Richard announced as they settled around the table. "They want to establish permanent funding for Thomas's program. They're calling it Wings of Courage." Thomas's face lit up. "Does that mean we can help more families?" "It does," Maria confirmed, serving him his favorite pasta. "Dr. Chen is already looking at expanding to other cities. Your birds are going to fly very far, Thomas." Eleanor arrived as they were finishing dinner, carrying a proof of her article for the Society publication. "I thought you might want to see this before it goes to print," she said, handling the pages with uncharacteristic gentleness. The article, titled "Love Redefines Family: The Martinez Story," was accompanied by photos from the workshop. Each image captured moments of genuine connection. Thomas teaching with confidence, Maria guiding with gentle strength, Victoria finding her new role, Richard watching over them all with pride. "It's different from our usual society pieces," Eleanor admitted. "But then you've all taught me that different can be extraordinary." As they passed the article around the table, Claire arrived from Vermont for her weekly visit. She carried a large envelope. "The divorce papers are ready," she told Victoria quietly, "but there's something else you should see." The envelope contained official documents for a new foundation, the Martinez Family Center for Inclusive Arts. Richard looked up from the papers in surprise. "Victoria?" "It was Thomas's birds that gave me the idea," she explained, her voice steady. "Our family may not look like what society expected, but we've created something beautiful. I thought maybe we could help other families do the same." Maria reached for Victoria's hand across the table. Their former tensions dissolved into understanding. "The workshops have shown us how many families need this kind of support. And we could use the guest house as the first center," Victoria continued, growing animated. "Transform it into a space where families can learn about art therapy, about accepting different kinds of love." Thomas wheeled between his parents, looking at the documents with interest. "Could we have a special room just for painting birds?" he asked. "And maybe one for teaching parents how to fly too?" Richard found himself smiling at his son's insight. "I think that's exactly what this center should be about, helping everyone find their wings, whether they're children or adults." Eleanor, who had once been the keeper of social propriety, was rapidly taking notes. "The society pages will need a whole new section," she mused. "This goes beyond charity galas and social standing. This is about real change." As twilight settled over the garden, Thomas insisted on showing everyone his latest painting, a large canvas he'd been working on secretly with Maria's help. It showed their garden, but transformed into a sanctuary where birds of all kinds flew freely together. In the foreground, a family of birds nested in an unconventional but loving arrangement. "See?" he pointed proudly. "That's us. And look, there's room in the sky for everyone's wings." Victoria studied the painting, tears gathering in her eyes. "When did you become so wise, my darling?" "Maria says wisdom comes from the heart," Thomas replied simply. "And my heart got bigger when we all learned to love differently." Richard moved to stand behind Maria, his arm settling naturally around her waist. The woman who had entered their lives as a housekeeper had become the cornerstone of their reimagined family. "You taught us that, Maria," he said softly. "You showed us that love doesn't follow rules. It creates its own path." As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the family remained in the garden, planning their new venture. The formal mansion behind them stood as a reminder of their past, while the garden represented their future, organic, growing, alive with possibility. Eleanor watched them all, Thomas explaining his vision for the art center, Victoria and Maria collaborating on program ideas, Richard and Claire discussing logistics, and realized she was witnessing something revolutionary. This wasn't just a family adapting to change. This was a family showing society a new way to define love, courage, and acceptance. The transformation of the guest house into the Martinez Family Center for Inclusive Arts brought new energy to the estate's grounds. Construction crews worked alongside artists and therapists, converting formal rooms into welcoming creative spaces. The garden, once a symbol of rigid perfection, now flourished with wild beauty, integrated seamlessly into the center's therapeutic environment. Thomas had taken charge of designing the main art room, his wheelchair moving confidently through the space as he directed the placement of easels and supply stations. "Every artist needs to feel at home here," he explained to the interior designers. "Like the birds in our garden, they come because they feel safe." Maria watched from the doorway, her heart swelling with pride. The shy boy who once watched life from behind windows had become a confident young teacher, his natural empathy touching everyone around him. Richard stood beside her, their fingers intertwined. "Sometimes I wonder," he said softly, "what would have happened if you hadn't come into our lives that day?" "Life has its own way of bringing the right people together," Maria replied, watching. As Victoria entered the room carrying color samples for the walls, the transformation in Thomas's mother had been just as remarkable as his own. Victoria had traded her designer suits for comfortable clothes, better suited to art therapy sessions. Today she wore paint-splattered jeans and a simple blouse, her hair pulled back naturally. "Thomas, darling, what do you think about these colors? Dr. Chen suggests we consider how different lighting might affect our students." "Can we make it feel like sunrise?" Thomas asked, wheeling over to examine the samples. "That's when the birds first start singing, when everything feels possible." Eleanor Henderson arrived with the latest Society magazine, which featured a full spread on the center's development. "You've started a movement," she announced, showing them the stack of letters to the editor. "Families from across the country are asking how they can create similar programs." "That's wonderful news," came Dr. Chen's voice as she entered the room. "Because the Foundation Board has just approved funding for satellite centers in 5 other cities. They want the Martinez model to become the new standard for inclusive art therapy." Thomas's face lit up. "Does that mean more families will learn to fly?" "It means," Richard said, moving to his son's side, "that your courage is helping change how people think about ability, about family, about love." Victoria joined them, standing comfortably next to Maria, a position that would have been unthinkable months ago. "I've been thinking," she said, "about the opening ceremony. Instead of the traditional ribbon cutting, what if we did something more meaningful?" "Like what, Mom?" Thomas asked, intrigued. "What if we invited all the families from your workshops to create a collaborative mural? Something that represents what this center means to all of us." Maria's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. "We could incorporate everyone's handprints like birds' footprints in the sand. And let each family add their own symbols of hope," Richard added, catching the vision. Eleanor was already making notes. "The Society pages won't know what to make of this," she said with a smile. "It's so far from the traditional galas and charity events." "Good," Thomas declared firmly. "Sometimes traditions need new wings." As if to emphasize his point, a family arrived for a tour of the still under-construction center. Their daughter, a young girl with leg braces, looked around, with wide-eyed wonder at Thomas's artwork hanging on the walls. "You painted these?" she asked shyly. Thomas wheeled over to her. "Would you like to learn how?" "Maria taught me that everyone has their own way of making beauty." The girl's parents watched with tears in their eyes as Thomas began explaining his technique, showing her how to hold a brush in a way that worked for her unique abilities. Victoria moved to speak with the parents, her natural grace now tempered with authentic warmth. "The first step is always the hardest," she said softly. "But watch, they'll surprise you with their strength." Richard observed the scene, his arm around Maria's waist. The woman who had entered their lives as a housekeeper had become the heart of their reimagined family, her quiet wisdom guiding them all toward something more authentic than they'd ever imagined possible. Dr. Chen pulled Eleanor aside, watching the interactions unfold. "Document this," she said quietly. "What's happening here goes beyond art therapy or social innovation. They're redefining what family means, what success looks like, what love can be." As the afternoon light filled the room, Thomas led an impromptu art session with the visiting girl. Victoria and her parents sat nearby, sharing stories and hopes, while Maria moved between them, offering gentle guidance and encouragement. "See," Thomas explained to his new student, helping her mix colors. "Every bird has its own way of making marks on the world. The beauty isn't in being perfect, it's in being truly yourself." Richard watched his son teach, remembering the distant businessman he'd once been, too focused on appearance and social standing to see the real beauty developing within his own home. The journey from that man to who he was now, standing beside Maria, supporting Thomas's vision, working with Victoria to create something meaningful, felt like its own kind of artwork. Eleanor captured the moment with her camera, knowing that no society page could truly convey the depth of transformation she was witnessing. This wasn't just about a new art center or an innovative therapy program. This was about the courage to break free from society's rigid frames and paint a new picture of what family, love, and acceptance could look like. The opening day of the Martinez Family Center for Inclusive Arts dawned with perfect autumn clarity. The garden sparkled with morning dew, and hundreds of colorful ribbons danced in the breeze, each one placed by a family who had been touched by Thomas's program. Instead of the traditional red ribbon across the entrance, a massive blank canvas stretched along the center's front wall. Families began arriving early, carrying paint supplies and hearts full of hope. Thomas greeted each one personally, his wheelchair moving smoothly among the growing crowd. "Welcome to our nest," he said again and again, his smile bright and genuine. "Today we all paint together." Maria stood nearby, helping organize the families into groups, her natural ability to make everyone feel comfortable turning potential chaos into harmonious collaboration. She caught Richard's eye across the crowd, and they shared a moment of quiet joy. Victoria arrived with Claire, both women carrying trays of paint-filled paper cups. Gone was any trace of the society hostess Victoria had once been. In her place stood a woman, comfortable in her own skin, ready to get her hands dirty with art and real emotion. "I never imagined," Claire said softly, watching her sister distribute paint cups to excited children, "that your journey would lead here. You found yourself, Victoria." "No," Victoria corrected gently. "I found something better, the courage to be myself." Eleanor Henderson, now the center's official chronicler, moved through the crowd with her camera. "The society pages will talk about this for years," she declared, "though I doubt they'll truly understand what they're seeing." "What are they seeing?" Dr. Chen asked, joining her. Eleanor gestured to the scene before them, Thomas guiding a young girl's wheelchair toward the canvas, Maria demonstrating adaptive painting techniques to parents, Victoria and Claire working side by side with families they would once have only met at charity galas, Richard carrying paint supplies with his suit sleeves rolled up. "They're seeing love reimagined," Eleanor answered her own question. "Family redefined. Society's boundaries being painted over with something more beautiful." The collaborative mural began taking shape as hundreds of hands, small and large, steady and trembling, all equally valuable, added their marks to the canvas. Birds of every color and shape emerged, some soaring, some perched, some helping others learn to fly. "Look, Dad," Thomas called out, pointing to where several children had worked together to create a nest big enough to hold multiple birds. "They understand." Richard knelt beside his son's wheelchair, paint smudged on his formerly immaculate suit. "They understand because you showed them, Thomas. You taught us all how to see differently." Maria joined them, her hands colorful with paint from helping young artists. Richard stood, naturally taking her hand, no longer concerned with who might see or what they might think. They had moved beyond such fears. Victoria approached with a small cup of golden paint. "Thomas, would you help me add our family to the mural? I think we belong right here in this open space where all the paths meet." Together, mother and son created a group of birds unlike any others on the canvas, different sizes, different colors, but clearly belonging together. Maria added some defining touches, her artist's eye bringing the group to life while Richard contributed his own careful strokes. "It's perfect," Thomas declared, but Victoria shook her head. "Not perfect," she corrected, sharing a knowing look. "With Maria. Better than perfect, it's real." As the afternoon progressed, the mural became a living testament to the power of acceptance and love. Families who had arrived as strangers worked together, sharing stories, paint, and hope. Children who had once felt isolated found themselves part of a larger flock. Their unique ways of creating celebrated rather than corrected. Dr. Chen gathered everyone's attention as the sun began to set. "This center," she announced, "represents more than art therapy or inclusive education. It represents the courage to question our assumptions about family, about ability, about love itself. The Martinez family has shown us that the most beautiful nests are those with room for everyone's wings." Thomas wheeled to the front of the crowd, his family standing proud behind him, Richard and Maria hand in hand, Victoria and Claire close, by Eleanor with her camera capturing it all. The boy who had once watched life from behind windows now faced a sea of smiling faces, all touched by his vision of a world where everyone could fly in their own way. "My first art teacher, Thomas D., said, smiling at Maria, taught me that love is like painting. There's no wrong way to do it as long as it comes from the heart. Look at our mural. Every mark is different, every bird unique, but together they make something beautiful. That's what family means, that's what love means." The setting sun painted the sky in colors that rivaled the mural's vibrancy, as if nature itself was celebrating this new definition of family and love. The Martinez Family Center for Inclusive Arts stood ready to welcome all who needed a place to spread their wings, a testament to the power of courage, acceptance, and the boundless capacity of the human heart to grow and change. As darkness fell, small lights illuminated the mural, making the painted birds seem to glow with inner life. Families lingered, reluctant to leave this space where they had found understanding and hope. Thomas watched them all, his heart full of joy. "We did it," he said softly to his family. "We built a nest big enough for everyone's dreams." 1 year. After the opening of the Martinez Family Center for Inclusive Arts, the garden bloomed with even more vibrant life than before. The once formal spaces had evolved into a harmonious blend of nature and creativity, where art installations nestled among flowering plants and wheelchair-accessible paths wound through butterfly gardens. Thomas, now 8 years old, sat in his adapted outdoor studio space, supervising a special project. The success of the center had inspired similar programs across the country, and today representatives from 5 new centers had come to learn from the original. "The most important thing," Thomas explained to his visitors, his confidence now, as natural as breathing, is remembering that every person has their own way of flying. Sometimes we just need help finding our wings. Maria watched from nearby, her heart swelling with pride. She remembered the quiet boy she'd met that first day, watching life from behind windows. Now he was teaching others, his wisdom touching lives far beyond their garden walls. Richard emerged from his home office, which he'd permanently relocated to the garden to be closer to the center's activities. His corporate world had shifted dramatically over the past year. He now focused primarily on expanding inclusive art therapy programs through his business connections. "The London Centre called," he announced, joining Maria. "They want Thomas to consult on their development plans via video conference. Our son, the international art therapy consultant." Maria smiled, leaning into his embrace. Their relationship had deepened over the year, growing stronger through every challenge and triumph. The social whispers had faded into acceptance as the success of their program proved more powerful than prejudice. Victoria. Arrived for her regular afternoon session, her artist's portfolio tucked under her arm. The guest house, now her permanent residence, had become a haven for parent support groups. Her own journey through art therapy had inspired many other parents to explore their own healing. "I've been working on something special," she told Thomas, setting up her easel next to his. "For the first anniversary celebration." Thomas wheeled closer, his face lighting up at his mother's canvas. "Mom, you've painted our whole story." The painting showed the mansion and gardens in transformation, one side depicting the formal, rigid past, the other showing the vibrant, inclusive present. Birds of all kinds flew between the two worlds, carrying ribbons of color that bound them together. "Maria taught me that art isn't about perfection," Victoria explained to the visiting representatives. "It's about truth, and sometimes the truth is messy, colorful, and more beautiful than anything we could have planned." Eleanor Henderson arrived with Dr. Chen, both carrying thick folders of data and testimonials. The center's success had exceeded all expectations, with hundreds of families reporting significant breakthroughs in therapy and personal growth. "The medical journal wants to publish a full study," Dr. Chen announced. "They're calling it the Martinez Method, using inclusive art therapy to heal not just individuals, but entire family systems." Thomas grinned at this. "They should call it the Bird's Nest Method," he suggested, "because it's about making room for everyone to belong." As the afternoon progressed, more families arrived for their regular sessions, the garden filled with the sound of laughter, art supplies being shared, and gentle encouragement being offered. Each family had their own story, their own challenges, but here they found common ground. "I remember when this was all just a dream," Maria said softly to Richard, watching Thomas teach a new student how to hold a brush in a way that worked for them. "A little boy who saw birds where others saw limitations." Richard squeezed her hand. "You gave him the courage to share that vision with the world. You gave all of us that courage." Victoria joined them, paint smudged on her hands, a sight that would have horrified her former self. "Look at what we've built together," she said, gesturing to the thriving center around them. "It's so different from what I thought family and success would look like." "Better than different," Thomas called out, overhearing as he wheeled past. "It's real." The visiting representatives gathered around Thomas's workspace, taking notes as he demonstrated various adaptive art techniques. His natural ability to connect with others, to see past their challenges to their potential, had become the heart of the center's success. "The key," he explained, helping a young girl adjust her brush grip, "is remembering that everyone has their own song to sing, their own way to fly. Our job is just to help them find it." Eleanor, who had once been the guardian of social propriety, now sat with her camera, documenting the session for the center's growing archive. "If someone had told me a year ago that this would be my life's work," she mused, "I would never have believed them." "Life has a way of surprising us," Maria replied, remembering her own journey from housekeeper to heart of this remarkable family. "When we're brave enough to let it." As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the garden, families gathered for the center's daily closing ritual. Thomas led them in, adding to the ever-growing mural that wrapped around the building's exterior, a living document of their collective journey. "Every mark we make," he reminded them, "tells part of our story, and together, all our stories make something beautiful." Richard watched his son, tears of pride shining in his eyes. The powerful businessman who had once measured success in dollars and social standing now saw it in the smile of a child, discovering their artistic voice, in the tears of a parent witnessing their child's breakthrough, in the quiet strength of a family learning to fly together. The evening of the center's first anniversary celebration arrived with a special kind of magic in the air. The garden paths glowed with soft lights and hundreds of painted paper lanterns, each created by a family touched by the program, hung from the trees like luminous birds caught in mid-flight. Thomas, dressed in his favorite bow tie, positioned himself near the entrance to greet the arriving guests. The shy boy who once watched life from windows had become a confident young leader, his wheelchair now a throne from which he shared his vision of inclusive love and acceptance. "Welcome to our celebration of flight," he called out to each arriving family, his smile bright and genuine. "Tonight, we're all birds of paradise." Maria stood nearby, her hand clasped warmly in Richard's. Their love had deepened over the year, growing stronger with each challenge faced and overcome. The social whispers that had once threatened to overshadow their relationship had transformed into admiration for their courage in choosing authentic love over conventional expectations. Victoria arrived from the guest house, accompanied by Claire. The sisters carried between them a covered canvas, Victoria's anniversary gift to the centre. The woman who had once defined herself by social perfection now wore her paint-stained clothes like badges of honor. "Thomas," she called to her. "Son, would you help me unveil this? It's for everyone who has found their wings here." As mother and son pulled away the covering, gasps of appreciation filled the air. Victoria had painted their story, not just the Martinez family's journey, but the story of every family who had found healing within the center's walls. The canvas bloomed with birds of every kind, each one unique yet part of a greater whole, their flight paths weaving together to form a heart at the center. "It's beautiful, Mom," Thomas whispered, reaching for her hand. "You've shown everyone how love looks from the inside." Eleanor Henderson, who had documented the center's journey from its inception, moved through the crowd with her camera. But tonight she wasn't shooting for the society pages. "This is for our archives," she explained, "for all the future families who need to see that different kinds of love are possible." Dr. Chen took the small stage they had set up in the garden, her face glowing with pride. "1 year ago," she began, "we opened these doors with a hope and a vision. Today, we celebrate not just the success of a program, but the triumph of the human spirit. The Martinez Family Center has helped hundreds of families discover their own ways of flying, their own paths to love and acceptance." Richard stepped forward, pulling a letter from his pocket. "We've received official confirmation today. 5 new centers will open across the country by the end of next year. The Martinez method will help even more families find their wings." Applause rippled through the crowd, but Thomas wasn't finished. He wheeled to the front, his young voice clear and strong. "But that's not the most important thing we're celebrating tonight," he announced. "We're celebrating love, all kinds of love, the kind that helps you fly when you think you can't, the kind that builds nests big enough for everyone, the kind that doesn't care what others think because it knows what's real in the heart." Maria felt tears in her eyes as she watched the boy who had taught them all so much about courage. Richard squeezed her hand, and Victoria stepped closer, the three of them united in their love for this remarkable child who had brought them together in ways they never expected. As if on cue, the evening breeze stirred the paper lanterns, making them dance like glowing birds in flight. Families gathered closer, drawn by Thomas's words and the magic of the moment. "Look around," Thomas continued, gesturing to the gathered crowd. "Every one of us has a different story, a different way of flying. But together we make something beautiful. That's what Mom painted, not just birds in flight, but hearts learning to soar." The celebration continued into the evening, with families sharing stories, creating art together, and adding their own touches to the ever-growing mural that wrapped around the center's walls. The rigid social boundaries that had once defined their lives had dissolved, replaced by authentic connections and genuine acceptance. As the stars began to appear above the garden, Thomas gathered everyone for one final surprise. Hundreds of small battery-operated paper birds, created in art therapy sessions throughout the year, were distributed among the guests. "When I was little," Thomas explained, "I used to watch birds from my window, wishing I could fly like them. But now I know that flying isn't about having wings. It's about having courage. It's about loving without fear. It's about making room in your nest for all kinds of beautiful differences." At his signal, the paper birds began to glow, creating a constellation of hope and possibility in the garden's darkness. Richard held Maria close, while Victoria and Claire stood nearby, all of them watching as Thomas led this final moment of the celebration. "So tonight," Thomas concluded, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed garden, We celebrate not just our center, or our programs, or even our success. We celebrate love, messy, unexpected, beautiful love, the kind that gives you wings even when you think you can't fly, the kind that builds nests big enough for everyone's dreams. The paper birds glowed brighter in the darkness, a testament to the light that comes when hearts are brave enough to love without boundaries. The Martinez family center stood as a beacon of hope, its walls filled with art and stories of transformation, its gardens alive with the promise of new beginnings. And in that moment, as hundreds of glowing birds illuminated hundreds of smiling faces, everyone understood what Thomas had known all along.